Now is the time to make your outdoor living space come alive with help from The Wall. I'm Jake with The Wall, and since 1985, we have been maximizing landscapes throughout the Portland and Vancouver area with retaining walls, fire pits, patios, and much more. We offer complete design and build options for all of your landscape needs. And remember, we are the pioneers in using recycled concrete. See our work at bythewall.com. That's bythewall.com. Then give us a call today to schedule your free estimate.
Initialize sequence.
Welcome to the Baldcast, a production of John Canzano's Bald-Faced Truth.
Jailblazers Untold coming out April 14th. I'm really excited to see how the Portland market, NBA fans, sports fans react to it. The director of the project, Sascha Gardner, is joining me to talk about it. Sascha, man, I got to see a screener. I don't want to spoil it for people, but man, I think this is going to go over really well. How happy are you with the final cut?
I'm very happy, and thanks for having me, John. And I think that me and the wonderful team at Propagate who helped make this, and I think we just all thought that this story was very complicated and nuanced. You're talking about a period that many people have fond and horrible memories of, depending upon who you ask. And I was just humbled that I got so many people to participate, and they were so candid and generous with their time to kind of walk through this era from their perspective and just really kind of peel back the curtain on what really went down during this era. And I couldn't be prouder of what we did. And again, if we had more time, I saw Damon on the All the Smoke podcast joking that, you can make a part 2 or part 3 of this. I'm like, yeah, you guys did a lot. But I think in little over an hour, I think we did a pretty good job of just giving you the history of this franchise, beginning with the 77 Apex and the magical feeling that this city has been trying to capture since then. And multiple people have tried since then and had various levels of success. But this is one of the teams that I think that it's just one of the most talented teams that never won a championship. It's one of the most successful teams in that era. And I think people forgot about that, given the Jailblazers moniker and all the baggage attached to it. So I think it's just great to just spend over a year on this and just kind of go down memory lane and get some new perspectives. And I found out a lot that I didn't know. And I'm just floored that everybody seems to be receiving it so well.
What was it like to sit down with Rasheed? Because he was intentionally difficult at times to cover. And I had a period of maybe 2 weeks where we were good. And then the rest, it just felt like it was always a tug of war. But you seem to have got him in a very relaxed environment. He was at ease. What was that experience like?
It was a great experience. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't my favorite interview of the whole project. It certainly was. No discredit to anybody else who participated, but I sat down with Rasheed for basically 6 to 7 hours. He gave me a lot of time, and you use that time to kind of warm up to him and kind of understand where he's coming from rather. And, I think for him, he had been kind of wanting an opportunity to kind of clear the air on some things. I think he felt like we did our research and, definitely came correct with questions that weren't just kind of, softballs and things that, again, our team's entire thing was, we want to be careful here. We don't want to retcon things. We don't want to create, what a lot of people refer to that a lot of these things are these days. It's documercials where it's just they're going to come in and just say that everything said about them was wrong and that they did no wrong and et cetera. No, they were pretty candid. They knew what they did, and they also wanted to acknowledge some fault for that, but they also feel that a lot of this stuff was misunderstood or overblown. And if we look at it with where we're at now in our current society, marijuana and all the things that they kind of got pulled over for would not really be much of an issue now. And I think that was just really funny with him. It's just he didn't hold back, he didn't shy. He shared a lot of painful moments, again, like the Lakers series, which I know we'll get into, and just his relationship with the media. And again, I think he I don't know how, if he played in today's landscape, it would be different. I think, maybe he would be a little bit more open, or he would have his own platform to kind of, speak out on certain things. But I think it was abundantly clear that, he felt that he had to put up a guard or a vessel because he just disagreed with how he and his team were being represented. And again, could there have been more kind of give and backhanded conversations between him and the media to kind of maybe eradicate some of that back in the day? Sure. But I think, we can't all look at things with perfect hindsight 2020. And he was in the middle of trying to win a ring every year, personal things in his life, so on and so forth. So again, not trying to make excuses for him, but he was just really candid in a way that I haven't seen too many. And again, I've been making these things for like 5 or 6 years now in sports docs, and like, he's definitely the most candid athlete that I've come across.
It's on Netflix, April 14th, Untold, the Jailblazers. It's a moment in time, right, in Portland for fans who follow this franchise from 1977. They see Drexler, Kersey. I kind of wonder, too, how the Drexler, Kersey, Porter era, good guys who won, how that made it harder for Rasheed and what Bob Whitsitt was trying to do. I mean, Whitsitt was very candid in talking to you about what he was trying to do. This was about salvaging some guys. He couldn't get players in free agency to come to Portland. They didn't have time to wait for the draft. He had to go out and take some problems and trade. I'm going to trade you my problem for your problem and try to do some, some refurbishing of the players. But I wonder how the Drexler era kind of framed the Jailblazers era.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, and again, like before we went into the project, I had to read Breaks of the Game. I had to read Wayne Thompson's great book about the Blazers, Blazer Mania, and just kind of get a more encompassed understanding of what this franchise is all about. And I think in a lot of ways, it's still chasing that magical 77 season. And you can make an argument. I'm sure people in Seattle might have a disagreement about tortured fan bases of franchise. They lost theirs. I'm a Bulls fan, and it ain't beautiful right now to be a Bulls fan. Although we finally made the right decision in letting some front office people go, in my opinion. But the Blazers, in a lot of ways, do feel kind of cursed. Like when we were talking, when I interviewed you, you laid it out from following 77, the injuries to Walton, him becoming embittered with the franchise, eventually going to the Clippers, passing on Michael Jordan, passing on Kevin Durant, Brandon Roy's injuries. Like, this is a fan base that's been through it all. And I think that after a real dark spot in late 70s, early 80s, when Clyde comes in and then Paul Allen eventually gets the team, you see this rejuvenated fan base and a team that literally, again, back-to-back finals, was right there. And it just sets such a high bar and standard, I think, for what follows. And I think also a lot of people in the community felt that they could relate to these players. They would see them all the time. They would socialize with them. They felt like they represented the city well. And then you have a very young group of players coming in afterwards with those kind of lofty standards. And it's a lot to live up to. And I think that, what was abundantly clear talking to these guys is they wanted to win. These guys were ruthless competitors. The practices and everything that these guys did in the seasons, the 9-year stretch of the Whitsitt era, they were all about business, contrary to what, the public perception was. But they were also just we're not those guys. We come from different backgrounds, different cities, different upbringings. We value different things. And so I think that this film is really, it kind of made me look introspectively at myself as a fan and kind of just what do I put on these players and these organizations? Are my standards as a fan too high? Again, you look at this team, you can make an argument that Bob Whitsitt's the greatest general manager in Trailblazers history. I mean, that 9-year stretch, you're talking about 2 Western Conference Finals. You're averaging about 50 wins a season. I think he's. I don't think there's a GM that's won more games than him. Maybe Neil O'Shea, but I don't think so. But they won the 5th most games in this era, and you're talking about the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, the Duncan Spurs, the Malone and Stockton Jazz era kind of ending. So like it's no small feat for them to do that. But I just think that again, they never got over that Western Conference final hump that like the Drexler era did, and they didn't have that finals appearance. And I think, obviously it was held over them despite all that success that I just mapped out. Yeah.
They missed 13 straight shots in that game 7, and it's brutal to watch. But I keep thinking, if they make a couple of those, they win that game 7. They go on to win the NBA Finals. Whoever was coming out of the West was winning. They probably go back to back. Probably Kobe and Shaq break up. It changes the NBA. There's a pivot point there in that game 7 that changes the NBA. I also think people in Portland wouldn't have turned on the franchise. I don't think Ruben Patterson gets brought in. I don't think, you don't have sort of the cascade of what happened after that game 7. And I think that Rasheed probably has a statue outside Moda Center. Like, it's all different. All right. There was a fishbowl effect, right? There you had a predominantly white community. You had young, wealthy, largely African-American players who were driving around Lake Oswego, driving around other places. You did a great job of sort of capturing the race element in this documentary. There was a fishbowl though. And now with social media and the 24/7 news cycle, everybody's in the fishbowl. Was this a precursor to what we have now? Or how do you sort of view what was happening with the Jailblazers when you cast it against what's going on in the world now with news coverage and how we cover teams?
It's a great question. I think so. I think, in addition to my episode, there's another Untold that's out right now about Lamar Odom, and like there's a and it's very good. Everybody should watch it. And there's a section in that film talking about, the rise of kind of just like reality culture, the paparazzi stuff, Lamar and Chloe's show, and et cetera. And you see like kind of the early onsets when buttressed with my episode, just kind of how the media landscape was evolving, what players were valuing, how they recognize themselves as brands and kind of individual IP and so on and so forth. But I think specifically, like, it's very easy to kind of draw a line to how the local Portland media and the Oregonian were kind of covering this team to kind of, larger mainstream news coverage today. And kind of, when you turn on First Take and things of that nature. And it's not to say that like, I read your articles, Jeffrey's articles, Dwight and Carey, everybody at the Oregonian, like it was fascinating stuff to read. And again, for all the criticisms and things that you were lobbing against their off-court transgressions, your understanding of the game of basketball and what was going on court was also, dead set in mirroring. And I just think it was a great look at kind of like elevated sports coverage, but also just kind of you saw what maybe some people saw as a very easy way to kind of get clicks. And if I could just cover an athlete like this, or like be focused more on this, maybe more eyes will be drawn to it. And they did not have the ability that all these athletes have now to kind of have their own media platforms or podcasts and things of that nature. I think a lot of people might scoff at that stuff now, and you kind of leave it to the professionals rather than kind of just like very skewed, one-sided, things. I don't know how fair that is. I think that like we always want to hear what the players have to say and their organic thoughts, and it just wasn't something that was really available to them back in the day, or they just didn't feel trustworthy of the media. And I think now it's a little bit different, and the NBA has protected the players in a lot of ways. Maybe this is a result of that, where post-game press conferences are different. You're never seeing a sports writer on the team bus or plane or anything like that anymore, for better or for worse. We're probably not going to get another breaks of the game, which is sad. But I think to hear the perspectives from the players themselves now, I think is definitely a result of kind of just that 20-year period afterwards of seeing, okay, there's another way to do this, and maybe we can get our voice out too.
Yeah, it's compounded by the fact that the Blazers are the only major professional sports team in the market. And so when you're covering this stuff, it becomes very easy to just shovel coal, and you're writing about him every day and you're focusing on him every day. And players, especially that weren't in the Portland market before, like Rasheed, he comes from Washington to Portland. He walks in. He's not used to that 24/7. Everything is about what you say, and then comes the yellow Hummer situation, and then comes mistrust. I remember going up to Sheed in the locker room when I first arrived, and he said, "I'm never going to talk to you." And I said, how do I not take that personally? And he goes, "It's not you." He goes, "It's just the way that things are covered around here." And it was really interesting for me to hear, like, you did a great job of showing his side of things, because I didn't know some of the stuff that was going on with him, especially when like John Nash came in as the new GM. I didn't know that Rasheed immediately saw that as, "Hey, I'm out. I'm gone. This is going to be a changing of the guard." Because I can remember going to his locker in that time. He had a game where he had like 11 assists and he didn't take a shot, or he maybe took one shot in a game, one of his last games as a Blazer. And I said to him, "Rasheed, do you want to be here?" And he gave the CTC quote at his locker. He turned around at the end of the day, CTC, cut the check. I realize now he already knew, like he knew he was gone. It was a protest game that he was throwing in that moment. You did a good job with Bonzi Wells as well. And for Bonzi, Blazer fans had a complicated relationship with him. They didn't like his comment in Sports Illustrated about fans don't matter to us. He had flipped off a bunch of fans. He had one thing where he threw gum at a fan or something, but he was never arrested.
Nope.
That seemed to be a point of contention with him, that he feels like he got done dirty a little bit.
Yeah, it was definitely the more emotional parts of our interview, was kind of reviewing that Sports Illustrated article and the after effect that it had on his public perception in the city and across the league at large. And, again, like, there are other players that, before this era, even, like Cliff and a few other Blazers that had some less than flattering things that happened off court. You had, like you mentioned earlier, you had Ruben Patterson, who had arguably the kind of the worst offense out of any player associated with this team. You had Quintel Woods and the dogfighting. You had a lot of sordid things. And Bonzi's, again, worst transgressions were basically some of the on-court fights and actions, and then this quote that just haunts him forever. And I'm hoping this film lessens that effect for him. But he felt that a lot of the stuff that teammates and things were doing was kind of obviously cascading over him and affecting him to the point where, he thought contracts were messed up. He thought, maybe potential opportunities post-retirement were messed up. And I know Damon kind of felt similarly. And that's why I think when they reunited in Georgia Tech recently, I know Damon and Georgia Tech have recently parted ways, but at the end of the film, you see kind of, the desire and kind of both of them, I think, to kind of learn from their mistakes. And when they're coaching these young kids, they're like, "Look, you can Google me, you can see what I did. I take ownership of it, but like, I crawl so you can walk," and so on and so forth. I think Bonzi just really wants to put that behind him. He wants people to, at least try to remember some of the good times that they had together. He certainly has no ill will. I think, as you saw when they finally had that reunion, it meant the world to him. And, we text and, he's over the moon. Like he's very emotionally at peace with kind of everything that's transpired. And I just hope that, the city of Portland and the fan base can also, maybe get to that point as well. It's tough, I understand, but I think that if you think about it, the good outweigh the bad, and they were truly just one of the best teams that recent memory has shown us.
They were no fun to play against. Other teams that came to Portland or played against the Blazers did not. They went, "Oh crap, we got to play that team." They were not fun. What struck me too was I forgot how young they all were, and I forgot how young Bonzi was, and how much of a mentor Rasheed and Damon were to Bonzi. And I was driving after watching the screener, and it hit me, and I was like, when Bonzi gave that quote to Sports Illustrated, he was hearing similar messaging from Rasheed as a young player who had just come into the locker room. But Rasheed was saying a lot of it behind the scenes, and maybe just kind of, bits and pieces were getting out. Bonzi how young he was, just said it. Like and there's some truth in what he said, because I even said, like, had that team won that game 7, it wouldn't have mattered that they were in a yellow Hummer. It wouldn't have mattered. The fans would have asked for their autographs. They would have cheered for them. They would have adored them had they won it. And so there was some truth in it. It was just in the context of what was going on. Bonzi, you can't say that. You can't give that quote, because that is, people won't forget it. And he was the one who said it out loud. Often with a piece like this, as a writer, I have to determine what doesn't go in. Mm-hmm. You had to make some difficult decisions, I'm sure, to keep the story moving. As a director, as you are approaching this, you're gathering, you've got Sean Kemp, you've got Bob Whitsitt, you got Damon, Rasheed, Bonzi. How did you decide what not to put in?
It's tough because, I always try to start off making these films talking to people in your world, because it's a little dirty, dark secret that one of my friends and mentors, his name's Gabe Honig. He was the showrunner of the Celtics HBO series that we worked on together. It's like you could talk to the people who covered the team at the era, in that era, and they can give you all these amazing perspectives that then, color how you go into interviewing the principals, the players, and the front office and things like that. And so you were one of my first interviews, and then I landed the players, and then Bob was, after those guys. And my interview with Bob, I think, was really what kind of helped frame a lot of the film, because again, like this era is so fascinating, and I wanted to get into more things about Walton and more things about Clyde and Buck Williams and all those guys, but ultimately this is what the film is about. And I think that having that knowledge from all those interviews, it just made it abundantly clear that the most important thing in this was, obviously what they did on court, obviously what they did off the court. But I think, again, just like it's in a lot of ways, it's a story about perception and reality, and how these can kind of define our celebrities, our athletes, our the people that are in the public sphere. And so that's kind of like what really became kind of the core idea and the guiding North Star. It's just like, what happened? How did that color perspectives? Whose perspective is right? Does winning a title matter more than public relations with the city, or is the relationship with the players in the city the most important thing? And I think that everybody had a different idea on that. And I agree. Like, if they won a title, like Jeffrey Arnold said, people will probably hold their nose and kind of make do with it, but they didn't, and so therefore. And then there's some people like I kind of talked to on background. They're like, I didn't care about the title. I just wanted to have a team I could feel good about and take my kids to, and so on and so forth. And so I think anything that kind of tied into that became kind of sacred, and everything else was just like it had to be left on the cutting room floor. And they're very difficult. And again, like we could have made more parts, we could have gone more in depth, but I think we tried to just distill that feeling that the city had and the players had, and just really just key in on the moments that were like most correlated with those stories.
You got Bob Whitsitt talking, and he was really good and really honest about failing and what haunts him. And that's going to stick with me. How much does Paul Allen's ownership factor in what happened with the Jailblazers, being that he was the youngest owner in the NBA, he was filthy rich? I call it a sociology experiment, because he hires Bob Whitsitt and says, let's win now, figure out how to win now. Like, you don't hear owners talking about that like as overtly as Allen probably did with Whitsitt. But how much do you see Paul Allen in this story?
I think that Bob gets criticized for certain transactions, and Bob gets criticized for basically being a quote unquote outsider. He's operating in Seattle, and fans are like, how can you know what's going on here and how we feel if you're not in the fan base? Paul was a lot like that too. And I think that Paul, it was a very abundantly clear, was one of those owners that I think we all want as a fan, is an owner who desperately cares about winning at all costs and wants to make sure that the product on the court is as excellent as it can be. And it allowed this kind of freedom, I think, for Bob to kind of operate. And so in that, from that 94 to 99 stretch, I think in a lot of ways he was operating with like impunity and had full say. But then after that heartbreaking loss in the 2000 Western Conference Finals in Game 7, that desire from Paul definitely shown, and he's a competitive guy, and he came in and being like, what can we do to kind of get over the hump? And he wanted to get rid of Dunleavy right away. He was done with him after that series, and Bob was like, well, he just won Coach of the Year and we have a good thing going. And I think that's a little too reactive. And so when you have an owner who definitely wants to make moves and has an idea, it's difficult for Bob to operate in that parameter, because if you have an absentee owner, you can operate as you see fit. But Paul had very, very specific ideas about how he thought the roster should be organized. He like you told me again, like when we were talking in the interview months ago, you look at the payrolls and the league salaries, like there was not a want for salary cap money from Paul. This roster was consistently in the top 3 highest payrolls in the league. But whereas when I was talking to Bob, I got the sense, I probably wanted to do a few other things differently, but Paul wanted to do this, and so therefore I had to do this. And for better and for worse, that happened, and the team definitely was not able to kind of get back to that promised land following, going into the 2000-2001 season. But Paul loved this team. He loved the city. He gave everything I think that he could to this franchise. I just think that, again, when you have some contrasting opinions about what to do and the owners say is ultimately what happens, I think, again, if Bob could do some things differently, he would have. And who knows what those moves would have led to. Sean Kemp acquisition is a perfect example. That was one that, in talking to Bob, he definitely hinted was more his idea than Bob's idea, and whether that is what happened or not. Even Paul, unfortunately, obviously passed away. Can't ask him for his point of view, but I think that tracks. And I think kind of like what I've researched in Paul's own book and Bob's own book and all these other things, I think there are a lot of key moves like that I think still haunt Bob to this day.
There are a couple of laugh out loud funny moments that I just shake my head. I don't want to spoil it for people, but do you have a moment in the documentary that is your favorite part, or that as you're putting this together, even when you're filming, or you go, oh, you recognize something when you've got it, don't you?
Yeah, I have, I have 3. I'll be quick. Like for me, the Hummer scene to me is a great scene.
100%.
I think there's an exchange between me and Bob regarding Ruben that I think was particularly illuminating. And, I think like in a lot of ways, Bob got the drop on me in that exchange because, he definitely had a retort for go back and look at that free agent landscape and tell me who would have been a better choice. And again, like didn't have the information at the top of my head in the interview, in the months that came back, like, oh, you had Allen Houston, you had a few other people, but not really, but I think my point was more like, you didn't have to bring in anybody, like you didn't have to make another acquisition. You kind of had this roster, and then you just let Jermaine O'Neal go and all this other stuff. So I think that was kind of more where I was going after. But again, he is looking at it from dollars and cents, X's and O's, analytics, all these different things. And Ruben was one of the best perimeter defensive players at the time, and he thought this would be the way to we can't neutralize Shaq. Nobody can neutralize Shaq, but maybe we could try to neutralize Kobe.
But Rasheed agreed with you, right? I mean, Rasheed essentially goes on to say like bringing Ruben in fractured the chemistry in the locker room.
And I think like Rasheed doesn't have again, I don't think he has a problem with Ruben. It's more kind of like the pomp and circumstance, it's like what the great quote unquote stoic leaders like Derek Jeter and everybody says, like, don't bring any outside distractions, keep it in here, like we're right there, why do this? And I think that's kind of what Rasheed was getting at there. And then I really like the final scene when
Yeah.
you get to see Damon and Bonzi together in the hotel room, anxiously anticipating going to the Moda Center and seeing how they're going to be received. And you know, Damon made the comment that like, I only did this because of you. You know, I only came out here and did and he wanted to just help Bonzi kind of rehabilitate his image because Damon, you know, Damon's protected here. He's born and raised. I think, you know, he's done so much community work. He still does. Like I was talking to Paul Knowles, mayor of Northeast Portland, 93, 94-year-old, about like all the stuff that Damon did for him and kind of his fundraising efforts for Northeast Portland. And so for the fact of him to do that and say that and see how emotional Bonzi got, it just really warmed my heart, and I'm just so glad that those guys got the opportunity, and not just those guys, but you got Brian Grant and you got Bob Whitsitt and you had Dunleavy. Everybody, so many people came back, and not Rasheed, and that's going to be interesting. You know, I you know, a couple days prior to that reunion game, Rasheed was in Detroit. And he was being honored by the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame for his contributions as a Detroit Piston. And, you know, there was definitely time to get to Portland afterwards. You know, I think it was like 3 or 4 days afterwards. But again, it was the holidays and he had family out there in Detroit too. But he definitely chose not to be there. And, you know, I think I don't want to make it explicit, and I can't make it explicit. I can't speak on his behalf. I try to leave it a little bit more open-ended as to why, because again, I don't know the real answer. But in the course of researching this project, like the one thing that stuck to me the most was a fan letter that was written to the Oregonian a few weeks after the Pistons won the title in 2004. And basically, this fan was talking about, I think the title of the letter was, you know, Wallace has the ring, but he's still a loser. And, you know, he said that, like, with all the hatred towards the Lakers, our Southern rivals, it was harder to see Wallace get a ring than to see LA get a title. And he's like, Rasheed is the worst thing that ever happened to this franchise. You're not welcome back here. There's no love for you here. And you know, as if I were Rasheed, stuff like that would stick with me, I think. And I don't know if this was all a factor into that decision, but I hope that, you know, I love sports and I'm a diehard fan, but like I hope that I don't ever get to that point where I kind of wish that ill upon somebody else, no matter what they did as a member of my team. As long as it's not like truly heinous, but like I don't think what Rasheed did was worthy of that. You know?
No, and you know, the paper sent me to that Pistons series to cover it. You know, how unusual is that to have it? You know, the Blazers weren't in the series. I get sent to, I'm bouncing between Detroit and LA, you know, covering this series, and when Rasheed saw me, he was different. He had a different demeanor in the locker room. He did a double take, like, you know, what are you, like, you're out of context. What are you doing here? And so I just remember thinking, you know, I was happy for him. He looked like he was in a better spot. He looked like, you know, and you had to kind of realize too, when you understand, you know, he's raised by a single mom. He loses key people in his life who die, you know, when he's in college. He, you know, he's coming to a foreign place, and, you know, I do think he was misunderstood in a way. I wish he would have dropped his guard a little bit. Damon and I were texting about this the other day, and I said Rasheed could have owned the town. And he was like, he goes, I agree. You know, it could have been his place, but he just wasn't interested in it. And I thought there's a passage in there where he talks about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and I thought that was really revealing. And then the Dave Chappelle show shows up in your piece. Like there's just so many little Easter eggs in there. I'm really happy that you did it. I think it's going to be well received. What's not in there, and I think Damon and I were both relieved about this, was the drug test.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about, you interviewed me about it. You interviewed Damon about it. Damon called me before we did our interviews, and he was like, hey, what do you remember about, let's go through this to make sure that we remember it the same way. We were both a little nervous about it because attitudes towards marijuana have changed. It was, I think, an important moment in his story because people in Portland loved that he did it. And the NBA hated that he did the drug test. But why did that get cut out? What was the decision there?
It's a good point. It's a good question. It definitely was in earlier versions of the cut. And then, we got kind of late in the game and we kind of all collectively realized that, it's called Untold Jailblazers. It's implied who these guys are throughout. We definitely talk about the name, but we didn't really address kind of like what that moniker really encompassed and how these guys really felt and just all the complexities that go around when you call a bunch of African-American basketball players the Jailblazers and things like that. So we kind of built a new scene towards the end that kind of featured Jeffrey kind of talking about that I think, encompassed the spirit of what he was trying to do with that drug test, which is, again, like, I'm not on the street begging for drugs or begging for money. I'm not a criminal. I smoked a little marijuana. I know that led to the trust in me being fractured. So I'm going to do something that definitely violates the players union's protocols to kind of show you guys that I'm clean and I'm serious about, who I am. And we were a little worried about, like, would that register as opposed to kind of just something a little bit more specific. And it's kind of like, again, like Bonzi was never in jail. Rasheed was never in jail. Damon was never in jail. And here we are, yet they're still kind of called that way. And yeah, so it was, again, it's a painful cut, man. Like, I didn't mind.
And I don't think Damon minded either because if you introduce it, now you've got to introduce the why of it, and you can't just introduce it as a one-off. And so you have to, if you introduce, Damon, it was important to him, and I'll never forget this. He and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, do you remember after you took the drug test, the next time you checked into the game at what was then the Rose Garden Arena? And he just got a big smile and he said, standing ovation.
Standing ovation.
And it came through in your piece that, a lot of players play in cities, and I don't think ultimately they plan to stay there and they don't care. And they're just there during the season and they're passing through. We've all had places we've visited where we're passing through. But for Damon, I do think, like, several times in your piece, he mentions his dad, his mom, his friends, watching the news, listening to the radio, reading the paper. It mattered to him, like what people thought of him. It really did.
No, I mean, you're talking about a man who grew up kind of mere blocks away from the Memorial Coliseum. His family used to listen to Bill Shanley on the radio calls and everything. And he used to go, he remembered the maximum capacity. He was describing, like, going up and where his family used to sit. Like, this organization was just embedded with his family. And then the Stoudamire family, like, just their presence in Portland, again, goes beyond just Damon and, like, his uncle, his father, his cousin, Karis now, like everybody. The fingerprints of him in that city are there. I think, like, the one incident with the police investigation and kind of how he felt that the illegal search and seizure and all that stuff, like, all these things kind of colored his perspective differently. And he was so open. I mean, he immediately sells that house. Like, he can't even look at it. He can't step back in there because he just can't shake that feeling. And I thought that was really profound. And it just shows, just, again, like, he wanted this to be a little bit different. He wanted this to be different than it was. He took ownership for his role in that. But yeah, I they're all really fast. And his stoicism, like, I mean, you've known him for so many years, but, like, his presence and the way that he was able to kind of articulate his ideas and experiences in Portland was very, very revealing. Like, he peeled back this whole tenure so well. And I think, like, to be quite honest, like, I think you can make the argument that maybe he was the most, he bared his soul the most, maybe out of all the three.
Yeah. Did it. Untold, Jailblazers, April 14th. Give it a look. You won't regret it. Sascha, thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it. What's next for you? You're in New York City. Yeah. Is that where you are?
I'm in New York. I'm in Brooklyn and Greenpoint. Yeah. I'm currently kind of looking for something else to direct. I'm producing. I can't say too much because it's not out yet, but I'm producing a a documentary with Mike Tolan about it's another basketball doc. It's another iconic figure. It's an iconic New York basketball figure. I'll let the speculation swirl around that one, but that's kind of it. But yeah, I think we'll take a few. We'll enjoy next week when it comes out, and then we'll get right back in the saddle on the next one.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for doing this. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.